I think it all starts with a belief. It starts with the belief that developing your people, developing your leaders really matters and it's worth it. And if you don't have that belief, if you just think that I'm hiring people to do a role, they should just get to it. And if they do a great job, I'll reward them. If they don't, there'll be other conversations. That's going to get you one type of culture and one kind of result. And that's very common. But if you start with the belief that investing in your people and their development really matters and it really pays off, there's high ROI, you're going to have a completely different kind of culture that people want to be a part of. It's going to lead you down this path of intentional commitment to your people, and they will respond.
Welcome. You're listening to This Leader, the podcast. If you lead people and are seeking the transformational, high-impact secrets that will lead to greater joy and fulfillment in your work, will optimize your team performance, and will help you create a happy, highly productive workplace, then you are this leader and you're in the right place. I'm your host, Claire Laughlin, and each week my guests and I will explore the mindsets, techniques, and actionable strategies that will help you build the career, team, and organization of your dreams. Because I believe no one should have to suffer in a dysfunctional workplace. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. I've got a great guest today on This Leader, and I'm so excited. I'm talking today with Jonathan Bissell, who's the founder and CEO of High Performance Impact LLC, HPI, which is a leadership coaching and consultancy group that equips leaders and teams to be clear, cohesive, and aligned, and helps organizations shape their cultures to reinforce their vision and strategy. He is a longtime colleague of mine and an experienced and award-winning training designer, executive coach, and organizational consultant whose strategic perspective, organizational development, and facilitative leadership skills have helped leaders and teams at organizations such as Google, Nurex, Snowflake, Elation, Accenture, Main Street Launch, Arcana Laboratories, the Table Group, and more, along with public sector agencies at the local and federal levels. Jonathan is a certified executive coach with many credentials and a certified master facilitator and director of certification for Patrick Lencioni and the Table Group's Working Genius Global Certification Program, where he has helped train thousands of facilitators from around the world to help teams increase their productivity, morale, and alignment. Jonathan is also an inventor galvanizer. For all you working genius enthusiasts out there, you know that means he has contagious energy and amazing ideas. I'm so thrilled to share my conversation with Jonathan because we're exploring why and how leaders need to fully commit to their own development and all the good things that happen when leaders take real responsibility for developing people in ways that create cohesion, clarity, and alignment within their culture. So let's get to it. Welcome, Jonathan. So good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Claire. I'm excited for this conversation.
I know, me too. And so you and I go way back, and we've been doing lots of leadership development together for several years. And we talk about it, of course, all the time. And even though my listeners have gotten a bit of a bio on you already and a little bit of preview of our conversation, why don't you just say a few things about what you do? I'd love to hear it from in your own words. What do you do? How do you do it? And what is this world of leadership development to you?
Oh, what a great question. It's always more fun to talk about the work idea than about myself. So the simple way to think about it is really, so I'm an executive coach. I work with leaders. And I also do organizational consulting
Yeah.
with leaders and their teams. And then I facilitate offsites and retreats and also workshops related to Working Genius, one of the topics that you've been deeply involved in as well the last couple of years. But the thread that runs through all of the work that I do as a coach, as a consultant, or a facilitator, it really relates to these three words like clarity, cohesion, and alignment. And that's
Yeah.
ultimately what we're always seeking
Right.
to help leaders with. And so that's what I love, is to see that start to come into focus for leaders, is like, oh, okay, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like when we work better together. And this is what it looks like when we're aligned.
Isn't that amazing? I agree 100%. And I think that it's one of those kind of elusive things. Like we can all agree, oh, that sounds great. We should have more clarity. We should have more cohesion. We should have more alignment. But how? It's the how. It's like literally living into that day in and day out through the choices that we make, right?
Yeah.
That's where the struggle is. That's where the real commitment and the practice of it all has to come about, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So in a recent conversation, we were talking about leadership development, how that impacts everything, right? Leaders need to develop and leaders need to have this real commitment to developing their people because that's what holds the whole organization together and literally creates the culture. How are we developing and growing together? Right. So I wanted to continue that conversation here and just sort of explore that a little bit. Because again, I think a lot of my listeners, everybody pretty much listening to this, considers themselves a leader, whether they really have a formal leadership role or not, certainly aspiring to lead and influence others in a really positive way. And so I want to think about what does a real commitment to leadership development look like? Like, what is that? What do you think, Jonathan? What does it look like when a person or an organization is truly committed to people development and culture development? What does that look like?
Mm. It's easy to spot it when it's there,
Right,
but I think it all starts with a belief. It starts with the belief that developing your people, developing your leaders really matters and it's worth it.
right,
And if you don't have that belief, if you just think that I'm hiring people to do a role, they should just get to it. And if they do a great job, I'll reward them. If they don't, there'll be other conversations. That's going to get you one type of culture and one kind of result. And that's very common.
right.
But if you start with the belief that investing in your people and their development really matters and it really pays off, there's high ROI, you're going to have a completely different kind of culture that people want to be a part of. It's going to lead you down this path of intentional commitment to your people,
Yeah.
and they will respond in really powerful, positive ways. And I think you and I chatted about that, this kind of famous little interchange that's been around for a long time in the training world, where this kind of CFO, and we're not knocking CFOs here, but this is just this kind of general quote.
The
The
role of being a
CFO,
steward of money. Yeah.
right, right. So the CFO says to the CEO, "Well, what happens if we invest time and money in developing our people and they leave?"
Right,
And the CEO pauses for a minute, and she says, "Well, what happens if we don't invest and they stay?" Right? And that is actually a really common scenario of not investing, and there's objections to, investing in your people, but then they stay and you end up scaling that lack of investment, right? Whatever you get is what scales. Whatever you have now is what scales, and so it all starts with that belief and what flows out of that.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the challenges with this, Jonathan, is that um that belief, where does it start and end? For example, I could spend all day, every day investing in my team, developing my team towards something, you know? And yet we also just have work to do. We just have to roll up our sleeves and get things done. So I think that can be a trouble point here is like, how much is enough? How much investment and development is enough? I think that can become a stumbling block because it's a hard question to answer. So then it could just be like, I just don't know. And I'm just backing away from the whole thing, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and I think the danger there is all or nothing thinking about it.
Right.
It's really first just saying, one, if I have this belief and this really matters, I need to just get started. And part of what that requires of the leader or the set of leaders who are involved in this is to think about what does the work require? What are the big goals of the company that we want to develop people towards?
Yes.
Right? So if you just develop people in a vacuum, that's not that helpful. It's like
Right.
it has momentary kind of temporal value, but we're really looking at how do we develop people within our context to achieve the results that we need to achieve as an organization, right? Both now and into the future. And that's really the starting point is like, what's the ultimate kind of end goal of this? And then we work backwards. It's kind of like that Kirkpatrick model of like, you have the ROI, the results that you want, and then you say, well, what are the behaviors that are going to get those results? And then what's the learning that gets us to that? And then what do we design in the room to get to those?
Absolutely. Well, and I think too, just to be clear, you know, what is the result? It's easy to fall prey to like, oh, it's all about the goal. And so we might over index on technical skills, like, oh, people have to know project management skills and they have to know how to use this software and they have to know basic manufacturing things or, whatever that is, very technical oriented because it's easy to tie technical skills to measurable goals. But it could mean that we don't pay enough attention looking at team development and how people are working together to achieve those goals or even individual development and how each person is showing up in their strengths at their best to contribute to the team to help the team reach the goals. What do you think about that?
I agree 100%. I mean, it's really the people side of leadership development that's going to yield the greatest results over time. And the higher up, in my work as an executive coach, the higher up the leader, the more those people skills and the ability to influence and manage change and all of those what people call soft skills are really powerful and most required at the highest levels of leadership.
Absolutely.
And it's good to have technical expertise, but the people skills trumps all of that, right? And so that's really what we're talking about holistically with this is you have specific skill competencies, but then you have all the people side of that. And I think you do a lot of work in the trust area too. It's not just what you do, it's how you do it. It's how you're showing up as a leader.
Yes.
And that's where the highest leaders are the stewards of that too, of setting the tone for the organization.
Right.
What does it look like what do leaders do here? How do they behave? How do they kind of relate to people or not? Those are all super important for a culture of an organization.
Absolutely. And we've seen this over and over where those things are not articulated and they're not clear. It's hard to define a culture. It's hard to define a culture, but unless we can put some parameters around it and find some clarity about who we are, like that brand, like what are our values? What do we stand by? What are we known for? Who do we want to be together? That kind of stuff. And it's so compelling because then that gives you all this freedom to help shape the culture, to bring people into the culture that are a good fit for that vibe, so to speak, that you're creating, that culture that you're creating. And if we don't have that, it's not well defined. We bring people in and then our culture just becomes kind of amorphous kind of it is what it is. We don't have enough clarity around it.
Yeah. So two thoughts on that. One is we definitely need to define like what is the culture. And typically it's going to boil down to things like what is our core purpose of what we do? What are our core values? What are our core decision filters about how we make decisions here and who we want to be in this company? And um, you and I have talked about how if you think of this idea of culture with a circle around it, the leaders that see themselves as outside of that circle and they just delegate that off to other people, they're going to have a hard road. There's going to be a lot of frustration, a feeling of struggle to influence that culture and constantly wishing it were different or faster. And they just really struggle with that. And they don't see themselves as the fish swimming in the water of the culture, which
Right.
they truly are, right? They don't see themselves as the stewards of the culture. And so at critical moments, they'll abdicate the responsibility to own the culture because they just see themselves as separate and apart from that. And so you and I have seen in so many different organizations, the leaders that are truly seeing themselves as stewards of and as part of the culture, they own it in a whole different way and they communicate that ownership to their partners in learning and development or human resources, all the leaders around the executive table. Um, there's just so much here. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I no, absolutely. I wanna talk a little bit more about that, like, what does it mean? What does it really look like to abdicate your responsibility or the opposite, to be fully in it? What are your thoughts on that?
I think if you're fully in it, you have this idea of upstream time and downstream time, right? And, the upstream is you see the value in spending time and money in developing your people and investing in them in such a way that they are able to then turn around and invest in the people below them. So
Mhm.
you just have this belief that there's this cascading positive effect from spending that time and the resources up front.
Yeah,
And you're willing to do that because you know on the downstream side, you don't want to be constantly putting out fires. You don't want to
right.
constantly be um, having to have the same conversations with people over and over again.
Performance conversations and, "Wait, how did that happen?" conversations, and "Is this person right for our culture?" conversations and all that kinda thing.
Yeah, and so the flip side of it is the leaders that don't own the culture, they don't own the leadership development. They just see that upstream time is kind of a waste of time, a waste of resources. Like, boy, did they pay the price, right? They're constantly putting out fires. They're constantly just spending a lot of time and resources, human resources, money to try to intervene in all these downstream fires that have been constantly set and created, right? That's what we see in so many organizations.
Totally, totally. And not only that, but the time and effort that we don't even quantify. Like we don't there's so much sort of wasted time and, unrealized potential that ends up floating around in organizations like that. Part of me wishes I could develop an app to track all that kind of thing. That would be a winner.
Yeah. It's almost like if leaders just did a simple audit
Yeah.
of their time, and it is right, upstream time on one column and downstream time on the other, and
Okay.
just say, where's the bulk of my time being spent right now?
Right.
What percentage of my time am I spending putting out fires
Yes.
versus intentionally developing my people,
Yes. Okay.
right?
I love that. So I have this time tracker that I call the tie tracker. It's time, impact, and energy. And it's tracking your tasks, but it's while you're tracking your tasks, you're evaluating, was this a high impact task or a low impact task? Right. So I'm thinking now that you said that, it should be like, instead of the tie tracker, instead of impact, it could be upstream, downstream, or something like, this was the task. Would this count as an upstream task that's contributing to future betterment, right? Or a downstream task, which is sort of looking backwards and trying to fix something that I could have maybe fixed a different way. Interesting.
Yeah,
That's good.
on this note too, and I want to come back to development in a second, but just even how we spend our time for ourselves and our own work, it's
Yes.
how much of our time is spent dealing with downstream things because we didn't just set aside a couple hours a week to step back and look at how strategic are we being with our time, right?
Yes.
Are we even spending anywhere close to 10% of our time being strategic and thinking about the work or about the business instead of being in the business? And that's just a great kind of measure right there of like upstream time, downstream time,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, I think on everybody's job pie, I like that we've done this together, Jonathan, this job pie exercise where you look through this lens of like, okay, I've only got so many hours. So, how should those ideally be sort of distributed? And every time I do that exercise, I suggest to people that they need a chunk of time that is specifically distributed to their own learning. You know, where's your, okay, look at your job pie. Where's that slice that's dedicated to my own development and growth? And then another slice being fully dedicated to this is time to develop my team. And those are the two hardest ones to find. All the other slices seem to encroach on those, you know?
I love this conversation because spending that intentional time investing in my own learning, it feeds everything. I just look at it as it's not a chore or a task. This is just what I do as a leader. And I don't think of it in a very rigid way. I just think I learn from everyone and everything. And so I'm a voracious consumer of podcasts and articles and videos and just whatever in books. And And what I love is not just in one arena or one dimension or one industry, but I love learning from psychology and business and everything in science because I find connecting the dots across those and how people show up as leaders within those different domains,
Yeah.
it gives me ideas that I can then take and share with my clients and really help them develop and just think differently about leadership, right? So,
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. And I mean, I dream of organizations that really encourage that beyond, that's the person, that's the development of the person. And we talked about this, like the technical development versus the team development versus the person development. And I always really think that I've been in organizations where they basically carve out specific time for people to go like, go learn whatever you want. We are supporting this. You can have a couple of hours, whatever, half a day a month or something. It's not a ton, but even a half a day a month sponsored by your organization that says you go learn anything you want during this time because we know that that will come back to us in new, fresh ideas, new, fresh perspectives. Be willing to talk about it and bring those learnings back to your team and share the learnings with the organization. But that time is yours to do whatever you want. It's so awesome. I love that.
that is so awesome. Here's where some leaders may be listening to what you just said right there and just saying, I don't know if we can afford to do that with the
Yes.
time, with the resources, whatever it is.
Right. The deadlines we have, the big things we're trying to achieve with the few people that we have, all that.
Right. I think this is where we can introduce a concept that's super helpful. It's been around for quite a while. I think it's called the 70-20-10 model, and it was originally created, I think, by the Center for Creative Leadership. And the basic idea is like these general guidelines of learning happens across these three dimensions of about 10% through formal learning, like that send them away to learn kind of thing,
Right.
or learning on your own through all these different, podcast videos, articles. And 20% is that social through peers, through supervisors, through coaches and mentors. And then 70% is on the job learning through the work that you're doing, through the meetings that you're in, through challenging stretch assignments. And so for those who were thinking a few minutes ago, like, we can't afford to send them away,
hmm
imagine this where you say, what if we just thought about all learning across these three dimensions and we say, whatever anyone learns in that 10% formal, let's reinforce that through this 20% social. Let's make sure, like, let's find out, like, what did you learn? How are you going to apply that to your work and connect the dots to, okay, I'd love to see you in this next quarter. Think about how you're going to apply that learning to the projects that you're a part of, to the people that you're leading, that's 70% on the job.
Yeah.
Then we're going to track that in some of our one-to-one conversations. How's that going?
Right.
What support do you need? And now you're getting to 100% learning across the organization consistently.
Yeah.
And that is a whole different return on investment for developing your people.
Absolutely. I think there's a real commitment underlying everything you're saying, Jonathan, to like really being committed to learning and growing together.
Yeah.
That if obviously toward the ends of what our organizational purpose is, right? But ultimately, we're all in this together. All the humans that are part of this organization are all working toward that goal by developing, learning, growing and contributing. And I find that that's a paradigm that I don't know, it's just a very fascinating paradigm. I'm wondering if I'm even really living that paradigm as fully as I could be. I'd like to be, but that's really something to consider. And I want to take us back to this other concept, which is if the leader is really committed to developing their people, and how many leaders have any skillfulness really or are trained at all in how to coach or teach or even be really good guides for their direct reports or for their teams. It's a skill set, as we know, since
Yeah.
we both dedicate a lot of time to that. It's not something that comes naturally necessarily. It comes naturally for some, but there's obviously a whole lot of skill to develop around that. How do you coach your folks effectively toward a goal? How do you become a great, leader of team dynamics and help shape the team energy toward goals? There's so much there. I mean, I spend all my time doing that. You spend a good bit of your time doing that. What are your thoughts there?
Oh, there's so many directions we could take, but I would say a lot of times it starts with watching and observing other leaders who are really good at this.
Right.
And just what is it about the way that they show up, what they do, the way that they run meetings, the way that they give feedback? What is it about that really resonates with you
Right.
that you might start to adopt
Yeah.
and to practice? It all comes down to these observable behaviors of what people do and say and what they don't do and say that you can start to adopt. Um, so that's one thing, is to become a student of other leaders. I never stop being a student of other leaders. I'm always just fascinated by how leaders are showing up and what I can learn from them.
Yeah.
So to take this kind of student mindset first as leaders. And then I think also thinking about that, the 70-20-10 is, if I'm a leader trying to intentionally grow myself as a leader, what's that 10% of like formal learning that I need to go through? Do I need to take a class on how to be a coach, how to coach people, how to lead in specific ways?
Right.
And then what are the conversations that I could be having with mentors, with peers, with my supervisor, or the people I lead around the things that I'm learning? And then how do I translate those to my on the job performance as a leader, where I can be super practical and give myself stretch assignments and give myself permission to put into practice the things that I'm learning in
Yes.
the 10 and the 20, right? So that would be a starting point right there, just to think about it like that.
I love that. And I think it's so wise to always be considering, okay, who has been a wonderful coach and guide to me inside and outside of the workplace? And what did they do? What were their behaviors? Were they, here's things I hear all the time. Oh, they were a really good listener, and they expressed belief in me and they saw capabilities in me that I didn't necessarily know I had. They gave me good feedback. They were real with me. There's so much there that we can learn from just by sitting back for a minute and going, yeah, what was that? How have I received that kind of guidance? And what really worked about it? And then turning around and saying, how can I emulate that with others? How can I bring some of channel that person or whatever into the way I interact with my team members, you know?
On that note, Claire, oftentimes I'll encourage leaders I work with to observe the leaders that they really respect and admire
Yeah.
and notice, like, what is it that they're actually doing?
Right.
And there's sometimes a little bit surprised, like, oh, like they just ask questions, they express curiosity, they didn't rush to jump in with their own ideas.
Right.
Um, and so, really, like becoming a student of leaders and of leadership is that first step of noticing there's so many simple things that great leaders do around us. And sometimes even people that we don't admire as much, they can have tremendous skill sets in a certain area. We can still learn from them.
Right.
And sometimes we unfortunately learn from the leaders that are not so good, and we learn what not to do. Okay, note to self, that will destroy trust. Note to self, that will destroy clarity or cohesion or alignment. And
Right.
so, um, all of this is possible, again, if you have this belief for yourself as a leader. We started with belief in development of other people, but if you have this belief that it's worth it to invest in yourself,
Right.
and that it's possible, and you're intentional and consistent about it, you will grow and develop as a leader. And guess what? One of the best ways you can continue your growth is to turn around and develop the people behind you. Share the insights along the way that you gain. And it's in the process of explaining and teaching
Yeah.
that you actually really master it. Right.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. Okay, so we talked about that belief, just to kind of bring us full circle. We really talked about having that core belief that development is a worthy strategy. Even when I use the word strategy, it feels a little bit too thin, you know, almost like it's not really it's a belief, it's a core belief. And then we can exercise it strategically, right?
On that note, I love the word strategy here because my favorite strategy thinker, this guy named Roger Martin, he describes strategy as this consistent kind of integrated set of choices that you make that position you to win on the playing field of your choosing. And in this case, you start with that belief, that's your kind of winning aspiration. And then you do need to make a set of choices that are all integrated, not separate, all integrated together that
Right.
position you. In this case, winning is to be the leader and the leader of leaders
Yes.
that allows your organization to win and the people below you to win in all the right ways.
So good. Yes. And to work upstream rather than downstream, right? To spend more of your time
Exactly.
working upstream, anticipating where we wanna go, how we wanna be together, and preloading, in a sense, preloading the circumstance, right? So we can really win on that field instead of spending so much of our time, effort, and precious energy downstream fixing things that have gone wrong.
You and I always end up in these conversations because it's so fun to think through and it's so meaningful, right? And I think on the downstream side, there's probably some people out there who are thinking like, well, that sounds great, but how do I avoid constantly falling into the downstream putting out fire?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Good question.
a simple way to think about it, this is just one dimension of it, is the better you get at creating clarity upstream, the fewer problems you have downstream. And so just to again, someone might be asking like, well, that sounds nice, Jonathan, but what does that look like?
Yeah. How?
I want to break it down a little bit, right? So it really starts with you think about clarity as what is my ask, right?
Yeah.
So the leader has to do a little bit of self reflection first, a little bit of homework first, and say, what is my ask?
Right.
Why does it matter? What's the bigger context for my ask? What's at stake? What's the opportunity? And then what does success look like with this ask? If it was carried out, what's the general picture of success so that when it starts to happen, we can recognize it, comment on it, give feedback, and know that we're staying focused and on track for it,
Right.
right? And then, are there any specific parameters around my ask, right? Is there a deadline? Is there a certain standard? Are there things to be considered that I need to communicate? And then it's to give room for people to ask questions and they have to trust you enough that you're not going to bite their head off to do that and give that clarity. Make sure that there's a shared understanding,
Right.
right? Even have them repeat back to you if you need to, but make sure that there's a shared understanding and then give them the autonomy to go,
Right. Give them a part to play, right?
part to play. And then you track with them and you assess the results and you look at where do we need to recognize and reward them? And how do we get really specific with feedback, both on the things they did well
Mhm.
and the constructive side of it? And so often it's like all this work goes into something and it's like, great job. That's not enough. You have to be super specific.
Right.
Um,
When you did this, this was the impact and the result,
yeah,
and this is why you're so valuable in this process.
yeah, that's right. And so all these things go into leader clarity and I call it leader intent, right? And it's if this intent is only the what and the when, it's just wholly insufficient and you will find yourself downstream in a lot of troubled waters, right? So that's just a couple of thoughts around that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that, uh, that the leader intent up front, the intent to develop, the intent to support, the intent to create that clarity is
Mm,
so, so important. And when you say from the beginning, what is the ask? I think, just remembering that the ask can and should be tied to the big culture of the organization, the direction, but also the way. It's what are we doing together? How are we doing it together? And what's most important for us to do now to make progress toward that big goal? You know, what's the win? Not so huge, some ginormous goal that has no real energy behind it, but what do we need to do right now to get us there? And I
yeah.
love the way you talked about just giving the space and the autonomy for people to then find their way within those boundaries, those constraints that are going to be part of the situation.
On that note, Claire, um, you and I have talked about this before of what's that thing beyond just intentionality that really matters? And we've talked about consistency. So it's not enough just to be intentional. You have to be consistent with your intentionality. And we've talked about how the difference with elite performers in every endeavor, whether
Right.
it's music or the arts or in sports, we see it most easily, but they are incredibly consistent. You can have two players with the same skill set, but the more consistent one is going to win more over time.
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
leaders have to think of themselves in this way as elite performers. So it's, how do I turn my aspiration into intentionality? And then what are the structures that I need to set in place to be simple structures to be consistent, right?
Consistent execution. Yes. What is the rhythm? What's the cadence of when I'll have these conversations and how we're tracking on our goals and how we're having our coaching conversations and when am I supporting all that stuff? I agree 100%. Consistency wins the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Positive consistency.
And you and I live and breathe this stuff, but there's probably some leaders who are listening right now and thinking, like, there's a lot here. Like, where do I start?
Mhm.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. What's coming to mind for me is come back to this place of, do I believe it really matters and it's worth it to invest in my people, in myself as a leader? And am I willing to be a student of leadership and get that payoff that's definitely going to come if I spend this intentional, consistent time doing this and just
Absolutely.
get started?
Okay, so this has been a fascinating conversation, Jonathan. Let's just kind of wrap this up. I want to just talk about what are some of the takeaways that you'd like this leader, our podcast stands for transformational high impact secrets, that turn ordinary people into extraordinary leaders. So, what do you think about what are some of those secrets that we've uncovered here in this conversation that leaders need to remember to really up their game a little bit and develop their people with intention?
Yeah. Let me answer that by starting with a quote from one of my favorite kind of management thinkers, Peter Drucker, right? And he has this great quote that I love. He says, only three things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. Everything else requires leadership.
That's
And
good.
isn't that so good?
That's
And
good.
I think that's what we're really talking about is the status quo, if you are not intentional as a leader, is not that things just stay okay. They devolve toward friction, confusion, and underperformance. And so just staying in place and not developing as a leader, actually things will tend to get worse over time. And
Mhm.
so we really want to be intentional about developing the people around us and developing ourselves as leaders. And it really just starts with this fundamental belief that this matters and it's worth it, and that I'm going to become a student of this my
Yes.
whole career, my whole life. And guess what? You will actually, and I'm saying you to all the people listening to this, you will enjoy leadership so much more when you're a student of leadership because you will not take setbacks as just this like bad thing that happened to you, but as, how do I learn from this? How do I make sure that the people I lead learn from my mistakes? How do I make sure that I learn from the great things and the mistakes of other people? And so it's just constant learning process. And it's not this like overwhelming sense of, oh, I have to do all this stuff. I have to be the best leader ever. No, it's, you're a leader in progress. We all are.
Right. Oh, I love that. So good. Well, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. This has been very enlightening. I appreciate it. I always love our conversation. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It was so fun.
How can people reach you if they want to reach out?
So I'm on LinkedIn if you want to
Okay.
reach me there. And then depending on the conversation that we have, we might connect over Zoom. I'd love to have Zoom calls with leaders and just to hear their story of leadership and how they can grow and develop. And I have a website as well. So it's www.hpi.team. And thanks so much, Claire.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, everyone. That was a very enlightening conversation, right? Thank you so much for being here. I hope you'll really think about how much time and effort you are spending developing yourself and others. And think about that part of our conversation, like whether you are truly working upstream often enough to save you some downstream effort. Okay. Check out our show notes below for a link to Jonathan's full bio and ways to connect with Jonathan. Until next time, go lead the way. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about my services and for lots of free resources and additional tools to enrich your journey, visit my website and subscribe to my newsletter at clairelaughlin.com. If you have a question about leadership, teams, or organizational culture you'd like me to address on the podcast, please reach out to me at support@clairelaughlin.com and connect with me on social channels at Claire Laughlin Consulting. Until next time, lead the way.